What is up, people? It is me, Brizzau here, back again, this time with my analysis of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Released March 3rd of this year for the Wii U, as well as a launch title for the Nintendo Switch, Breath of the Wild was developed with the idea of rethinking the classic Zelda formula. Although the timeless Zelda formula has been well established since Ocarina of Time, Nintendo felt it the right time to go in a different direction, and indeed an absolutely new experience was born. In this video, I will not only be analyzing the game objectively, but also as a member of the 3D Zelda family, and what it does right straying from the formula, as well as some of the things that are missed from the typical Zelda experience. Bear in mind I've only put 23 hours into this game so far, and I know I have so many more things to do before I'm even close to 100% completing the game. Therefore, my review will be purely on my experience thus far. As far as spoilers go, for both story and gameplay, I'm not going to be holding back, really, as this video is summing up my full experience and opinions with Breath of the Wild so far. If you have yet to play the game, you might find it best to skip to this time on the screen to hear only my conclusion about the quality of the time you'll spend in this rendition of Hyrule if you're worried about spoilers. Without any further ado, this is the Breath of the Wild experience. The game begins with Link waking up half naked to a mysterious female voice. I wonder who this could be. After a brief opening sequence, you run to the tip of a cliff, showing the grandiose landscape of this rendition of Hyrule. No doubt, this is the largest world in Zelda history by far. Shortly after the spectacular setting shot, you stumble upon an old man who tells you he'll give you a paraglider necessary for getting down from the elevated piece of land where you've woken up. Given you track down some orbs for him and some local shrines, of course. Each of these shrines in the beginning of the game gives you a new rune, which are effectively this game's supporting cast of items, and an orb upon completion, which I will touch upon a little bit later. The 4 runes you obtain here are Remote Bombs, this game's version of the classic Zelda bomb bag, Magnesis, which allows you to pick up and move any metallic object, Stasis, which freezes an object in place while allowing it to both maintain and gain its kinetic energy that will be applied after stasis ends, and Cryonis, which can create up to 3 ice pillars out of any body of water. These runes will prove necessary in solving puzzles for the rest of the game, and are a very welcome change. In previous Zelda titles, the Fields of Hyrule often had areas to which you would have no means of accessing until later in the game, when you had proper equipment to interact with the environment, i.e. the power gauntlets in Ocarina of Time, bombs in pretty well any Zelda title, the double claw shots in Twilight Princess. I think you get the idea. In Breath of the Wild, you start the game with all the abilities you will need to solve any puzzle in the game, which means if you can't figure something out, it is because there's a piece of the puzzle you can't find a place for in the grand scheme, and not because that piece of the puzzle is locked in a chest in the Water Temple. Upon completing each shrine, you go to meet the old man in the rundown Temple of Time. He explains to you that he is the previous king of Hyrule, now wandering in spirit form. He dumps some exposition on you here as well, revealing that 100 years ago, you fought alongside Zelda in the 4 champions to try to quell the threat of Calamity Ganon. Alas, Link, Zelda, and the 4 champions weren't ready for Ganon, and they were all defeated. In a last-ditch effort, Zelda put the mortally wounded Link into his 100-year slumber, and locked herself as well as Ganon in Hyrule Castle, where they still are today. And the former king explains that the champions all piloted a divine beast, and that the key to defeating Ganon is to travel to each of these beasts and release them from Ganon's control. After his exposition, the king implores you to save Zelda in the kingdom of Hyrule from Calamity Ganon and gives you the paraglider. With the paraglider now in your arsenal, you are now free to roam Hyrule and strengthen yourself in order to fight Ganon. Your immediate task seemed to be to liberate the divine beasts. However, if you so choose, you can simply say fuck the beasts and run straight to Hyrule Castle in nothing but your underwear. It is recommended you don't do so, as obviously you will be quite weak ascending up to the top of Hyrule Castle to fight the final boss, but nevertheless the option is there. Never before has this been an option in a Zelda game. This alone speaks volumes of the way Breath of the Wild wants to be experienced, which is whatever way you see fit. Although some seem to be more difficult than others, you can defeat the divine beasts however you'd like, albeit being optional to begin with. Hell, even the Master Sword, a Zelda icon and mainstay, is entirely optional. Breath of the Wild's opening sequence throws a massive, unexplored world right in your face, and although it gives you some main quest lines such as the Divine Beasts and collecting the old memories that Link has forgotten, the way you go about saving Zelda in Hyrule is entirely up to you. Truly a full U-turn in the tried and true Zelda formula. Next up, let's get started on the Divine Beasts, as I believe these to be the main bulk of Breath of the Wild's core storyline. Sure, there are the memories which you may collect as you explore Hyrule, but searching for these is a tad bit tedious and offer little reward outside of a cinematic at the end of the game which you can easily search up on YouTube. The Divine Beasts are, in no particular order, and forgive me if I'm butchering the pronunciation here, Vanaboris, the Camel Beast in the Gerudo Desert, Vah Ruta, the Elephant Beast in the Zora's Domain, Vah Meadow, the giant bird flying over the Rito village, and Vah Rudania, the lizard beast walking on Death Mountain. As you could probably tell from the art design, these Divine Beasts are more machine than they are beast, and I personally love the design themselves. The Divine Beasts all require a short setup mission before you gain access to their inner workings. These setup missions always introduce you to a supporting character who will ultimately help you in boarding the beast itself. Each time, you and your partner will attack the Divine Beast, incapacitating it just enough so you can climb aboard. The inside of these beasts are Breath of the Wild's dungeons, although they stray quite far from what us Zelda fans have come to know as a dungeon or a temple. To begin, as soon as you enter, you will hear a voice instructing you to get to a stone that will give you a map of the Divine Beast itself. The main difference between this and a typical dungeon map from previous Zelda iterations, however, being that this map actually gives you a certain aspect of control over the Divine Beasts themselves. Probably my favorite example of this is Divine Beast Vah Ruta. Controlling the trunk allows water flow out of her trunk into different parts of the beast itself, turning turbines inside Vah Ruta and even allowing you to climb her trunk. When you receive the map, you will also be instructed to activate 5 terminals in the beast via solving puzzles by utilizing both your runes and your control of the dungeon itself. Upon activating all 5, you must go to the main terminal of the beast that will now be accessible, which will trigger the boss fight against a form of Ganon who has taken control of the Divine Beast, causing them to go rogue in the first place. Upon defeating them, the defeated boss will drop a heart container, and upon reactivation of the cleansed terminal, the spirit of the ancient champion who assisted Link and the princess will show their face and regain control of the beast. They will gift Link with a power unique to them, and the Divine Beast will assume a position firing a laser at Hyrule Castle, preparing for the final battle with Calamity Ganon. This is the Breath of the Wild dungeon formula in a nutshell. Now, I might ruffle a few feathers in saying this, so consider this a trigger warning. I think the Divine Beasts are a step back in terms of 3D Zelda dungeons. They did some things right. Controlling the environment of the dungeon actively from the very beginning in order to solve puzzles is engaging and makes you think. However, the progression of the dungeon itself suffers from being non-linear in design to an extent. If you know these dungeons well, you'd probably be able to beat them in about 10 minutes. The dungeons also consist of just about no enemies, and none other than the bosses that are actually difficult. Sure, they're the guardians and globs of purple death that impede your progress until you can find out how to get a shot at their eye, but for 99% of the Divine Beast experience, there is no enemies to deal with, and although this could, in theory, lend to the puzzle-solving element, the puzzles themselves are not usually too hard to figure out. If Nintendo had simply made the Divine Beasts larger in design in the land of Hyrule itself, they would have been able to make them more of a room-to-room puzzle-solving extravaganza that I personally feel would lead to a better experience. This is one aspect of the traditional Zelda formula I feel they didn't really need to tamper with, and it just feels lacking running around in these barren beasts, devoid of any challenging enemies and full of mediocre at best puzzles. The bosses are okay, although nothing special, and also feel like a step back in terms of Zelda bosses. They mainly utilize the new Flurry Rush technique, which allows you to land multiple hits in succession after dodging attack right before it is about to land on you. Although you can face these bosses in any order you so choose, bear in mind some are much more difficult to deal with. I'm looking at you, Thunderblight Ganon. Which kind of makes me feel like there's an order to defeating them which seems most logical. For example, I fought Windblight Ganon first with the minimum amount of hearts and minimal gear, and died a total of 0 times, whereas the fight with Thunderblight must have taken me an hour of running my goddamn head into a wall until the concrete finally broke. And this is when I had various abilities, gear, and hearts picked up along the way. I think what the Zelda team did right with these dungeons, however, was still present a unique asset to Link for liberating each beast. The typical mini-boss die, dungeon item get formula that has worked so well has been replaced, but Nintendo has done a good job to make the abilities you receive from the champions of the Divine Beast still unique and generally helpful. Although I won't go in depth on 75% of them as they are combat based and I agree with their inclusion, I'm not so sure about Bravali's Gale. As opposed to being a combat skill, Bravali's Gale creates a large updraft that carries you upward, allowing you to climb large cliffs much easier, and overall making the land of Hyrule and even the other dungeons so much more accessible at an early point in the game. It's almost like Nintendo wanted you to go liberate Va Meadow first, especially when you consider Windblight is easily the weakest of the 4 Divine Beast bosses. This fact disappoints me, and takes away from the open-endedness of Breath of the Wild. If you want me to save the Divine Beasts any way I see fit, don't make some of the bosses exponentially easier than others, and have others yield results that are exponentially better than others. Bravali's Gale just has so much utility you'd be crazy to not get it first with any prior knowledge of what the champions each reward you with. I suppose it really isn't that big of a deal in the grand scheme though, seeing as how the Divine Beasts are entirely optional. Besides the rewards I've listed previously, the only thing saving all 4 beasts will do is give you a little background into the world of Hyrule and the 4 champions, and all the lasers from the Divine Beasts will knock off half of Calamity Ganon's health when you finally do go to fight him. This was sort of a slap in the face, to be honest, as the fact that you never needed to save the Divine Beasts in the grand scheme of things takes away from the satisfaction of going to the far corners of this wonderfully diverse Hyrule to liberate the different cultures. There's no point. This, in my opinion, is the main flaw of the Divine Beasts, even though the design itself was pretty lackluster. Let's, for a second, compare this game to Majora's Mask, a personal favorite of mine. A lot of the enjoyment in Majora's Mask is not from the story's progression, but from the interaction of the NPCs in its world. You get to see the positive impact you have on Termina as you help its denizens, and although you could argue it too gets erased as you constantly go back in time, you actually get a better ending for collecting all the masks, as you get to see all the people you've helped and influenced along your journey. Majora's Mask does a great job of showing you the heroism of Link, both in saving Termina from the impending destruction of the moon, and also helping with their everyday blights. Saving Hyrule in Breath of the Wild seems to fail at this, due to a few cracks in logic. If Link can in theory just wake up from his 100-year catnap in his boxers, run his sorry ass to Ganon, kill Ganon, thus freeing the Divine Beasts from Ganon's control and solving all of the people's problems right there and then why even bother wasting time and giving Ganon time to potentially escape by running around Hyrule raiding the Divine Beasts one by one? I was fully expecting the Divine Beasts to blow down the walls of Hyrule Castle, giving Link access to Calamity Ganon, allowing him to save Hyrule once and for all, with the help of the Divine Beasts and the champions you had spent so much time fighting to save. It would have given those moments with the different tribes so much more weight and impact in the grand scheme, as opposed to being something the player has a choice whether or not they want to even do. I understand they wanted to make the game wide open, but there were ways to do that with a well-established story as well. For instance, just make the Divine Beasts a mandatory part of the storyline. In this scenario, you still have the core open-ended nature of Breath of the Wild. You could do all the side quests and world exploration you want, the addition of runes allowing you to do so. But if you do so choose to do the story quests, you get the full impact, seeing just how much you've done, how much you've grown as a champion of Hyrule, instead of casually saving everyone's ass in 40 minutes. Like, jeez, Ganon utterly slaughtered Link and his friends 100 years ago when they weren't ready to fight him, with the help of the Divine Beasts, and Link can just wake up in his underwear and beat him with nothing but a wooden sword and with no one by his side? It takes away from everything Breath of the Wild story tries to establish for you. Okay, so I'm done ranting about the Divine Beasts, which admittedly did not seem to be a huge part of Nintendo's focus with this game. So what was their huge focus then? That's right, the world of Breath of the Wild, its diversity, its landscape, its vastness, and all the nooks and crannies you are left to explore in it, sure to take an average player hundreds of hours to complete everything there is to do. Well, what do I, Brizzau, think about the open world of Breath of the Wild after being so critical about some of the other ways this rendition of Hyrule was different from the formula? Well, highly intelligent asker of said question, they absolutely knocked it out of the park. Like I said earlier, each culture is full of character and life. The Gorons living in the scorching heat of Death Mountain, the stylized Zora living in the gorgeous Zora's domain, the misandristic Gerudo living in the vast Gerudo desert, and after too long, the return of the Rito people living in the heights of Rito village. Every culture is rewarding to visit and help, even despite what I said about it being unnecessary in the grand scheme. I particularly liked the Zora's prince, Sidon, who has a cheesy smile that makes a rupee noise when his teeth glimmer. Exploring the grandeur of Hyrule between these villages is in my opinion the most rewarding of all of Breath of the Wild's experiences, with new physics, and again, the addition of ruins making everything so much more accessible if you can think of a way to approach it. Basically, if you can think it up and it makes sense, you can do it. Whether it be lighting grass on fire to create an updraft you can use with your paraglider, or connecting electrical currents by placing metal swords in the ground, it is very evident how much work the producers put into the life and creativity of Breath of the Wild, and it is the shining light of this Zelda experience. Exploring place to place, you're sure to run into these giant towers that spread out of the ground at the beginning of the game. Finding a way to get to the top of these towers, you will gain access to the landscape on your world map, be granted a wicked vantage point to scout around, and now you can fast travel to this tower moving forward. These vantage points are perfect for scouting around for shrines, which when activated can also be used as fast travel points. There are 120 shrines, each with a unique challenge, usually a puzzle. These sort of soften the blow of the lackluster dungeons, and I was very pleased with the sample size that I tested when I played. With all these shrines, towers, towns, and just cool places that I told myself I had to visit, it was very often I found myself straying from my original objective to explore whatever had caught my eye. That's exactly what I want out of an open world game. A land where I can just get lost and have as much fun paragliding over huge chasms and climbing mountains as I can traveling to each corner of the map to fight the divine beasts. I don't know what else to say really. The open world of Breath of the Wild is the best part of the game. In my opinion, the best open world game I've played since Skyrim, and in all honesty, may even surpass Skyrim for my personal enjoyment of this particular sandbox. Lastly, I feel like I should talk about the mechanics of this game. Combat, and other Zelda titles, has never been a shining quality of the games. It's often the puzzles, overall adventure, and cool moments along the way. I would even go as far to say that combat in previous titles is very lacking, and to be honest, the trend continues here. Although, yes, there is more variety in which you can take down the generic baddies this time around, there's still nothing very special about the combat here. The previously mentioned flurry rush technique is a good attempt, but honestly it outshines every other combat technique to the point that it just becomes 90% of all encounters. Returning from Skyward Sword is the stamina wheel, which is used while sprinting, gliding, climbing, and using power attacks. And should you obtain 4 of the orbs you get for completing a shrine, you can either increase your stamina wheel or get a heart container. The addition of upgrading your stamina is a good idea, and I welcome the stamina wheel, as I feel it makes combat a little more innovative. For instance, when wielding a two-handed weapon, holding down the attack button will cause Link to whirl around in circles, draining your stamina wheel slowly. With a greatly upgradable stamina wheel, this makes for some good fun. So yeah, combat is a little better this time around, sure. You can do goofy things like roll an explosive barrel down a hill and blow it up with a bomb arrow, but it just still feels lacking for whatever reason, and is certainly not a prevalent reason to pick this game up. Alright, so combat isn't anything to write home about. Perhaps the new inventory system is? In Breath of the Wild, you start out with a set amount of inventory slots for weapons, shields, armor, and bows, and seemingly an infinite amount for miscellaneous shiz. This is a welcome addition, opening the door for unique weapons and armor. That being said, personally, there wasn't a huge thrill in collecting new gear for me. Most of it was just generic upgrades. There is, however, some utility to some pieces of armor. For instance, you can get armor that protects you from the extreme heat or cold, and my personal favorite, the Zora armor that allows you to swim up waterfalls. There are other unique bonuses, but many are just generic, such as quicker climbing speeds. Your weapons and shields now have a health meter, meaning after extended use they will break and be removed from your inventory. Fear not, as you'll find tons of loot from the enemies you fight along the way. This all just feels a little redundant to me. I had no issue when you were limited to only the Master Sword, and similar to the armor, the weapons are in general very generic and offer no real bonuses.
It sort of makes collecting new weapons feel like more of a chore than anything else, and I personally would have liked if the weapons did not break with use, but were simply harder to obtain. Sure, some pieces of equipment technically don't permanently break, as they temporarily break and then return to your inventory, but why not just make the Master Sword and Hylian Shield just unbreakable but very difficult to obtain? The upgrade to Link's gear here just feels like a forced change to impose a more open-ended feel, which for me just falls right on its face.
They could have made the gear in this game so much more fun, and they just absolutely squandered it. One positive thing to take away here though, generic inventory space is awesome. You can find tons of ingredients in the world to create dishes to restore your health,
Elixirs that increase Link's attributes, and much, much more. Nintendo did this well, in an upgraded inventory that otherwise feels so forced to meet the game's new genre. Alright, so the video's wrapping up. What is my conclusion, you might be wondering?
Well, I gotta say, I love this game. All 23 hours I've played so far have been stellar, and I don't regret buying a Switch, even if this is the only game I will ever buy for it. But okay, why? I mean, if I have such a poor opinion on so many little things, why is the big picture so much better? Well, although I despise the lack of structure to the story, if you did decide to get around to it, I enjoyed it for what it was. It was awesome boarding the divine beasts, and although the dungeons themselves were a little lackluster in terms of length and structure, I applaud Nintendo for the direction they went with here, and I think the whole manipulation of the dungeon thing is a great idea that just wasn't executed to its full potential, and I look forward to this idea being expanded upon. Although the inventory and combat were also lackluster, when aren't they in a Zelda game? You didn't want to buy this game for Link's gear or the spectacular combat system. You bought it for the different take on the Zelda format, with a brand new adventure in Hyrule, and this game delivers on that. I hope they move forward with the ideas they brought to the table here, but they're not glaring enough to distract you from the brilliant world that Nintendo has created, and exploring Hyrule this time around is more exciting and rewarding than it ever has been, with more content and beauty than any other rendition of Hyrule, hands down. Is this my favorite Zelda game? I don't think so. Is this a great Zelda game? Absolutely. Is this a great game in general? You know it. Nintendo was very bold in the production of Breath of the Wild, straying away from the formula of one of their only continuing successful franchises. And although I don't think they created an absolute perfect masterpiece like everyone else seems to believe, I enjoyed this game a great deal. And I think Nintendo did a great job changing up the Zelda formula, and I can only look forward to more improvements to this new game style in a series that was getting to a point where it needed to break away from the status quo. If you like Zelda games, open world games, or just good games in general, buy Breath of the Wild. If not on the Switch, then on the Wii U. It doesn't matter. Buy this game, you will not regret it. I give this game 96 Spirit Orbs out of 120. A revolutionary take on Hyrule that unfortunately has a few gaffes in design due to this being Nintendo's first stab at an open world Zelda game. Alright guys, we've reached that point. If you stayed through this whole video, thank you so much. I put a lot of work into this. Going forward, I'm going to be continuing this sort of video as a new series, and if you guys enjoyed this, I would really appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up or left a comment and told me what you liked and didn't like, and anything I can do better. Anyone that's a loyal fan will know I never ask for this, but I would really appreciate it in this case, seeing as how I put so much time into this. Anyway, begging aside, you guys know what's good. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.